Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's event on AWS Cost Optimization. Live Q&A with some really smart and excellent experts and me, in addition to the smart and excellent experts. So I see people still rolling in. I'm going to give people some time to do that. And while people are joining, I'll give some quick introductions. So I'll start off with myself.
We're going to start off with Jonathan freezing. Tim, how about you give your first introduction?
Sure. While we wait for Jonathan to unfreeze at this very unfortunate moment, my name is Tim Banks. I'm a technical account manager here at Mission. I come from a long background of over 2 decades in operations and systems architecture, systems administration, data stores and database, both SQL and NoSQL. With an extensive background as well in DevOps and site reliability engineering and building pipeline solutions for moving a lot of data around. As such, I managed to gain the skills to do so efficiently because while everyone likes to have performance, no one really likes to pay an entirely lot of money for it if they can't.
All right, I'll go next. I'm Jason Gay. I am a senior cloud analyst here at Mission. I've been with the company for about 6 years now. Started off in the company working on our technical team, helping out some of our managed IT customers back in the day, and got really interested probably about 5 years ago in cost management and exercising my incredible ability to be thrifty. So I was able to take those skills and bring them into this role and help customers save a few bucks and try to translate, some basic actions that they can do into, into very simple cost savings opportunities.
Excellent. So my name is John Hashem, one of the sales engineers actually at Cloudhealth. So help customers in their cloud journey, adopt the Cloudhealth platform, just helping type of proof of concepts or any demonstrations that they might need throughout the whole process. So thanks for having me.
Sure.
And so I think we're waiting for Jonathan, a victim of Spectrum Internet. I think no call outs there, but yeah, Spectrum, if you could get over to Jonathan's house and help him out, that'd be great.
Maybe he's got to turn that splitter around in his box outside his house, and maybe it'll make the traffic flow better. I don't know. So yeah, we can give a little high-level overview of Mission. I mean, I think that would probably be best to start us off there. Tim, what do you think? We can kind of jump into that?
Yeah, why don't you do that, Jason?
What we're going to do from here?
Probably more versed.
All right, so Mission is an MSP. We are the byproduct of 3 different MSPs coming together about 2 years ago. We were formed from Ec2 Technology Group in Boston, Stratolux out in LA, and Relium out in LA as well. We all joined forces and combined ourselves together, became a superpower, and we are now Mission, and we do all sorts of cool, awesome stuff. And I'll let Jonathan take it from there.
Jason, thank you for that. Isn't it perfect that right when I click the start broadcast moment and start talking, my internet decides to just die, right? So this broadcast is brought to you by T-Mobile today, as I'm tethering on my cell phone. So, my favorite thing about live events, right? Should be fun. So Jason, you've introduced yourself, and Tim, you've introduced yourself. Is that right?
We all have.
Just waiting for you as well. Perfect. All right. And it sounds like you already introduced Mission as well, Jason.
Very high level. If you want to go into a little bit more detail.
Perfect. Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the critical thing to understand here is that Mission is an AWS partner. In fact, we're a premier partner, which is the top tier, which I'm sure Jason mentioned, of partners with Amazon. And so we are deep experts in AWS kind of across the entire spectrum of what they do, from architecture, migrations, optimization, which is the topic of today's kind of Q&A, and everything in between. So, and have we had a chance to introduce Cloudhealth yet?
John just started to, yeah.
Excellent. So I'll let John go ahead and finish introducing who's Cloudhealth.
Sure. So Cloudhealth is a cost optimization and cloud financial management platform that helps customers in their cloud journey, from things such as helping with charging back and charging assets to optimizing their cloud spend, to being able to do things like just have visibility across different clouds. So there's a bunch of things we can help with, but that's just a few to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll add that Mission is a huge user of Cloudhealth. We actually use it to power all of our cost optimization services. And Jason here is also a big time expert on Cloudhealth. So we're super excited to be partnered up and having this conversation today. So I think one more little piece of housekeeping as we get rolling. This platform you're in now is called Crowdcast. It is probably new to most of you, and guess what? It's new to us as well. So we're really excited to be using it and putting it through its paces. And there are a couple of areas that we'll focus in on. There's a section at the bottom of your screen called Ask a Question. And in order to drive this conversation, we want to make sure that we've got some great experts here for you to pick their brains about cost optimization topics. Please use that section to add in any questions that you might have. There's also a chat area that you can toss questions in there if you'd like. I'll be monitoring them all. And my role here will really be about surfacing those questions and helping the group identify the areas of conversation that are most interesting to you, the audience. So with that, let's get started. And I actually want to start off kind of at a high level around understanding what cost optimization means from kind of like a programmatic level. And I thought, Jason, it might be a good place to kind of pick your brain. You know, a lot of people, when they come to me, and this is, I'm sure we'll have this question rolling in a little bit, when they talk about cost optimization, they think, well, is there like an easy button for cost optimization in AWS? So maybe give me your view on is there an easy button, or is it a bigger process?
There is no one simple magic bullet to fix this. There's 1,000 things you can do. There are a ton of different things to look at. Cost optimization can be different from company to company, from environment to environment, from account to account in your AWS journey, right? There's something going to be different no matter what you're doing. It's like anything you do on a computer, right? You can get to the same result 17,000 different ways.
Yes.
I tend to like to look at things, look for the low hanging fruit things first. Look at things like, hey, do you have devices that are EBS volumes that are not attached to resources? Do you have a decent amount of RI or savings plan coverage? Are you right-sized appropriately? Are you spending your money properly? Are you keeping a whole bunch of technical debt hanging around for no apparent reason other than the fact that you're afraid to turn it off and throw it away? So yeah, there's no magic bullet here.
Yeah, and there's a lot to consider, right? There's architecture, there's financial mechanisms like reserved instances and savings plans that you talked about. There's a lot in between there as well. So there's no easy button. It really does require kind of a holistic approach to the challenge. And Tim, kind of in your role, you've done a lot of work with architecture. Maybe give us some insight really quickly into some how architecture can impact from a cost optimization perspective.
Certainly. So I think at the very beginning, whenever you're designing an application or anything for infrastructure-wise, you're going to want to keep cost in consideration, because a lot of times when people don't architect well, they end up throwing money at the problem, whether they mean to or not. If you have a system that doesn't scale well, then you're going to have to throw money at it. Right? If you have a system that doesn't for example, that doesn't have a good kind of backup solution, right? You have to do whatever you can to keep it from going down, and that's going to take money. Sometimes that money isn't infrastructure money. Sometimes that money is engineering money, like in person hours, but it's still throwing money at a problem. If you architect well and you can architect efficiently, you give yourself enough sliders to be able to make adjustments on the fly as you need to, you're going to be more cost efficient, especially if you can do something where you can leverage more cost efficient methods of having architecture, such as leveraging Spot. If you architect your workload so that it can be durable, even if the instances go away, then you're going to save a lot of money that way. So these are things to consider at an architectural level before you even put the first line of code on an editor.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you just said that. There's a customer that I had worked with for a long time, and his mantra is, if I can throw money at a problem to solve it, I'm going to. And, you know, sometimes it's the right answer and sometimes it's not. And most businesses don't have that luxury, but it's just an interesting way to look at things.
Yeah.
But I think too, that's an easy one to say until it actually happens. And then you realize, well, I'm bleeding money out. We had a customer that, it was something, they had some just in their monitoring. They had a simple monitoring script they were running that was costing them like an extra $30,000 a month in CloudWatch because they forgot to put in a sleep function. Literally one line of code cost them $30,000 a month.
That's amazing. Yeah, those are the types of things you have to, obviously, this is where Cloudhealth is such a great asset, right? Because it helps you put in like guardrails and alerts and things like, you know, if I'm going off the rails, I want to know about it instantly. So I don't want to pivot into tools quite yet because I want to stay on this topic just briefly on architecture. One of the things that, you know, Jason, you mentioned about people throwing money at a problem, right? They're willing to do that, right? It is all about choices, right? Optimization, cost optimization doesn't mean, is not the same thing as reducing cost necessarily, right? It's being sure that the dollars that you have and that you're spending are being allocated to the appropriate things, right? So, for example, you may be spending, overspending on performance that you don't need, right? And underspending on DR and resiliency that you do, right? So, cost optimization is often viewed as how much can I save? When reality, what it's all about is how can I take my budget, right, and align it to my business goals. One of the best parts of that, spend your money smart. AWS, one of the best things about AWS is they give you more levers to pull from a price performance perspective than any other service in the universe, right? But making every single one of those decisions is a decision and is an involved decision and a choice and has impact on price and performance. And so optimization has to include that as well, right? What are your goals? Is your money supporting those goals appropriately?
Yeah, I think cost optimization is more about overall value than actual dollar amount, right? Even if you spend the exact same, but your architecture is now more resilient, it's higher availability. It requires less engineers to care and feed with the same amount of money. That's still optimized.
Yeah, I agree. Totally. I'd say a couple of things that come up as well is, especially architecture related, is data transfer. That seems to be kind of the hidden one that people just assume that, you know, data is going to traverse the internet or you know, whether it's in a region or just, you know, out to some other type of infrastructure, and then you rack up those costs over time. Is something, as you mentioned, is not a simple fix, but something through like endpoints can help, you know, reduce some of those costs that people tend to really forget about until that bill reaches, you know, the CFO knocking on the door.
It's funny. People don't pay attention to data transfer until they need to pay attention to data transfer.
Exactly.
All of a sudden, it's like, why is this costing me so much?
Yep.
Very true. Hey, we did have a question come in. So a quick reminder to the audience, please do post questions in the Q&A section, and you can actually vote up or down questions in particular that you think are more interesting. So I want to call out the first question here, which is on DynamoDB. So the question is really about, I'll start answering here. What is the best way to minimize costs with DynamoDB on tables that are not currently being used or have very low traffic? And can you deactivate a table without deleting it? So this is very much one of those price performance questions. So maybe to the panel, does anyone have any commentary on that balance with DynamoDB?
So I think the overarching wisdom with DynamoDB is you're still going to save money with reserve capacity on those. I mean, you have to be talking about a table that's very low utilization in order for that to be something that's not going to be cost more. And then the question is, if it's that low utilization, is DynamoDB even the right place for that information to be?
Right.
You know, as a key value store, which is essentially what DynamoDB is. It's going to be very high performance. I mean, AWS, the actual Amazon.com website switched over from Oracle to DynamoDB because of its performance. But it's not always the best tool. So I think for me, this is where we go back to architecture, right? If you have something that's very low traffic, if you have something that just doesn't get much do you need DynamoDB for it? Do you need something else maybe that can be even lower cost? Like, I mean, if depending on what the type of information is, can it be something that can be thrown in like Memcache? Can it be something that can be thrown in just an Aurora table, right? Where like Aurora on demand or something like that, depending on what size it is. So the general wisdom, again, I wouldn't switch to on demand unless it's extremely low utilization. I don't think you can deactivate a table without deleting it. But if it's something that you don't need very often, maybe you have some kind of background processes that throws it back into the table, that creates as a new table and then references it on, as needed on demand, like a Lambda function or something like that. Yeah, there's a lot to that. So there's no easy answer. But again, that's something I would say. The things you want to consider is how much demand and is DynamoDB the right tool for you?
Got it.
You got spot on.
Perfect. Yeah, great answer. So I'm going to mark that one as done. We do have, I saw, thank you, Steve, for that question, for what it's worth. I do see someone named Jose. Thank you for your question as well. It looks like you added it as a comment on this question. So before I mark this one as done, we'll answer your question next, because I want to make sure we get to everyone's questions before we just ramble on about our topics of discussion. So the question comes from Ec2. In an implementation scenario with reserved instances, what would be the recommended cost optimization strategies? So this is, RIs are a very broad topic, right? There's quite a lot of things we could drill into. So maybe, Jason, I know you spend a lot of time talking about reserved instances, and maybe John, if you have any visibility or insight on this as well. Any commentary on that question?
Yeah, so reserved instances are cool, but they're like 2019. So they're useful when it comes to EC2. Don't get me wrong, and you certainly have the ability to save quite a bit of money, but you get significantly more flexibility with savings plans. So your question specifically, Jose, is an implementation scenario with reserved instances. What would be recommended, cost optimization strategies? There's no one strategy for it. The first thing I'll tell you is don't ever try to get yourself to 100% coverage, right? And we had a bunch of customers come to us with that same problem when this whole COVID pandemic started a few months back, which was, I was trying to get myself to 100% coverage to reduce my costs. And I'm like, well, when you do that, you put yourself in a position where you have zero flexibility now. So if all of a sudden you find yourself having to turn resources down and not use them, or they're underperforming, so you shut them down for certain hours a day, or maybe you resize them to function better in a smaller usage scenario, you're stuck paying for them. And that's kind of a big problem. And people are like, I got to get myself to 100. I got to get myself to 100%. I got to do it. I got to do it. Mm-hmm. Don't you stop thinking like that, right? So I always tell customers we should target somewhere between 65 and 80% coverage. It really depends on what your usage is, but that's where savings plans make it so much easier to deal with it. You're just looking at the dollars that are being spent, and you're trying to cover a certain amount of those dollars and get a discount on those dollars, as opposed to worrying about, am I getting an RI for an M5 extra large Linux instance, and what if I'm not using that instance as an M5 extra large anymore? Maybe we're in a downturn and I made it a T3 large for the time being and dealt with a burstable instance type. Well, savings plans will still cover you there. And an RI, unless you bought a convertible RI, you're stuck paying for it. And the other thing to look at with that too is the types of RIs you're buying. So if you're gonna go down the path of buying RIs, yes, will you save more money with a standard RI? Absolutely. Assuming you can make the commitment to staying with that instance type in that operating system for whatever the term is, whether it's 12 or 36 months. But again, what if you go and, if you buy a standard RI and you're running a bunch of Windows with Microsoft Windows servers running SQL embedded on it, and all of a sudden you no longer need these servers, no one's going to buy that SQL Server RI from you in the market. It just, nobody wants them. It's like, so you're going to be sitting on this cost and you're baked into it. Sorry.
It is very much a balancing act, right? Of like, right. And that's just the exchange you make. And so, making those decisions, you have to rationalize, understand what your options are. And I actually do think to help walk through that challenge, maybe John, could you tell us a little bit about how Cloudhealth can help you identify gaps in your coverage and help you strategize on what you should buy and not buy?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great point. I was just going to chime in a little bit too, especially in an implementation scenario. If you're talking about your day one, it's as Tim and everyone mentioned, your architecture is going to be your stop point. So start there with architecture, make sure it's architected right. Then dive into right sizing, and just changing tiers as a 25 to a 50% cost savings. And then when you look at savings plans, which is commitment based, so and your highest savings are applied first. So for example, there's coverage types of certain instances where you get a 52% cost savings will get applied first by AWS. And then some of your other instance types like your T series are at a 49% coverage rate. So they'll be applied next. So just making sure you choose properly to start is where you begin. And then Cloudhealth can help you with implementing the reservation utilization or savings plan utilization. And that really starts at incorporating size flexibility to figure out, are you reserved correctly? It's looking at that, 65 to 80% coverage ratio is, I think, industry best practice. And obviously, we do that. We're about close to that 80% internally at Cloudhealth. So what you'll see is Cloudhealth can help you track those metrics in figuring out, do you need to reserve a little more or less? I've actually seen an interesting use case for a larger enterprise where they were actually reserved at 95%, which I was kind of glad I was sitting for that conversation. But the good thing about that is they actually had a cycle with Cloudhealth was able to help them identify the gaps in their reservation utilization, and they told their developers, we're underutilized just based on when workloads run on overnight. So you're going to run this thing overnight because that's where our gaps lie. So that's something that Cloudhealth identified to them. Otherwise, people look at 95% and they're saying, hey, can I get to 100? Or how do I get to that extra 5%? And the conversation is really, how do you utilize what you've already spent? Because savings plans are great, but if you're committing more, same with convertibles, you're always having to commit more, which makes sense for a cloud provider.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. You can convert this RI, but it has to be of equal or greater value. It really needs to be of greater value.
Yeah. And to John's point, right, actually, Jason on a daily basis is in Cloudhealth using the tools in there to help our customers understand which RIs do you need to buy? Do you action them now? Is it, savings plan a good idea? All of that, kind of insight and visibility is ultimately the most important part about making these decisions. Is you've got to have the data and you've got to have it in a way that's digestible, that you can actually make rationalized decisions. And sometimes that's a little bit difficult if you're just using kind of the AWS native tools, which are good and a good starting point. But we often refer to Cloudhealth as sort of Cost Explorer on steroids, which is sort of unfortunate for it not being able to make it into the CMP Hall of Fame. It's kind of a shame over time.
It'll just have an asterisk.
It'll just have an asterisk. Right. But it truly is an incredible platform, right? For this. So I definitely highly recommend it. For sure.
One of the things I was going to say, Cloudhealth does it really, really well for you when you're looking at stuff like reservations. It breaks everything down for you into normalized units, right? So if you're looking in EC2 or RDS standpoint, every instance type or every size has what's called a normalization factor or normalized units. That's not easy to find if you're, or even calculate it when you're talking about buying tons and tons of RIs. If you're looking at something inside of Cloudhealth, that's going to tell you, hey, you have 3 of these M4 large instances, and I don't even know the numbers off the top of my head because I just reference a document whenever I go and look at it. But that's worth 24 normalized units. Okay, cool. I just got to get to 24 when I go and buy this, or if I want to get to a certain percentage of it. So it makes it significantly easier to figure out what I'm doing. I'm not knocking Cost Explorer. Cost Explorer still has its purposes, and there's times to use that too. But I find that I can get my reporting significantly easier out of Cloudhealth.
Yeah.
So quick before, just to interject, we have some questions rolling in, which is great. Keep them coming. Please do vote them up if there's anything that you think is particularly interesting to talk about. Just a reminder, use the Q&A section. All right, I'm gonna let you go ahead and go, Tim.
So yeah, I was gonna say, I really think that when we're talking about speccing out a new implementation, in general, I don't recommend anyone ever think about RIs at the get-go, right? Because you don't know what it's going to be. And we've had people come in here where we do calculations from the get-go and say, hey, I think it's going to be this, I think it's going to be this. And then it turns out to not be that. And then now you're sitting with a pile of reserved instances that you're on the hook for. Always make data-driven decisions, right? So get your 30 days of usage on the platform, get it, all your bumps normalized, and then reserve against that.
And it's important, actually. That's a really good point. So when we make, reservation or savings plan recommendations with customers, one of the things that I think it's really important to look at here is how are things performing today, right? So I'm going to dumb this down to EC2 for a second because it's an easy thing to pick on. It's easy. It's really super easy to work with, but it's a good analogy to go for. What are the key metrics with an EC2 instance? You want to look at CPU, you want to look at memory, and you want to look at disk, right? CloudWatch is only going to give you CPU utilization. So you've got to have a tool in place to look at those other metrics. So if there's some sort of monitoring tool you can look at, I know for us, CloudWatch natively integrates to Cloudhealth, but if we have other monitoring tools, like we use New Relic will tie information in too. So it'll pull that data in, and you can now start looking at resource utilization amongst all the different metrics and have it provide you with those recommendations and use them as guidelines. Again, it's a computer telling you what to do. And I never fully trust it, never have, but it's certainly a starting point. It's like, all right, it's a good place to have a conversation around it and think about it. But if you have that data and exactly what Tim's saying, all right, customers will come out to me, well, I have to have a high performance CPU on that. Well, why? You're not using it. There's no reason for this resource that you're running to have 16 cores in it when it's averaging 2% CPU utilization along the way. Get out of that M series and move it over to an R series where it's clearly memory metrics that are highly utilized.
So I think, and not to jump in too much, but I think that kind of goes a little bit with with one of the other questions I've seen in here about people talking about provisioned IOPS and the prices like that getting out of hand. Jason mentioned, if you need performance is going to cost, right? And I say that because if you need performance out of disk, right? If I need more performant disk, then that's going to cost. So it becomes a balance of, all right, do I need to have this running on an instance? Does this instance have to have provisioned IOPS? If this instance has to have provisioned IOPS and they need to be at this level, then all right, well, how fast does the overall instance need to be? It does scale with CPU, unfortunately. But again, that comes back to a question is like, all right, well, is running this particular workload on an instance the best thing I need to do for the performance I'm expecting? Mm. Is there a better way to architect this to get the performance I'm expecting, where maybe I pop this off to some other higher speed thing where I'm using a cache like Elasticache? Or do I need to maybe look at putting this on an i3, right, with the NVRAM storage instead? Yes, it's more expensive overall, but are you still spending that money trying to provision it out and provision IOPS and SSD anyways? So that's one of those questions where if you are looking at just trying to turn up performance on one specific aspect of your architecture, and you can't architect it differently, then yeah, it's going to cost. I mean, there's no way around that. I mean, AWS is going to make their money. But I think to the extent where you start talking about, where does it cost? So if you understand how AWS works, to give you a little bit of glimpse into the sausage, where as people, you're still looking at a divided number of dividing out a finite number of resources. So when you have to say, I'm going to set aside this number of IOPS across this shared platform for me, they're going to charge you for that. And if that is critical to your business, then you're going to pay for it.
Got it. Yeah. Does any other information to add here on the provisioned IOPS being expensive? I mean, they're expensive because there's actually a cost for AWS, right? And that's why it's more expensive. Whether or not it's a fair price is obviously up to you, right, to decide, is that worth my money? But anything else to add?
Well, I think as you look at, how critical is your business, especially what size your business are, there are other levers you can pull, whether you look for something like private pricing or whether you look for EDP discounts or something like that. There's some options there, but typically, whenever I have someone that has an instantiated workload that has to run on high-speed disk, first I'm going to ask them is, does it have to run on instances? Can you run this in containers, and maybe pick specific containers to run on higher performance systems if you need them, and that way you can be very granular about it? Or does this high performance thing, maybe would it do better to offload this data into Elasticache or some other high performing cache where you can have some more knobs to turn, and maybe it's gonna be less expensive than trying to have this gigantic system with a lot of provision to IOPS that doesn't necessarily require a lot of CPU, but you have to have it because you have to have the scale for the disk performance. Get it off the disk. Memory is always going to be faster than disk anyways.
Right. Okay, good. All right. So I actually see a ton of questions rolling in. This is awesome. Thank you to the audience. And there's actually getting some votes here. So we did talk briefly about data transfer and some hidden costs around it. The question is, can you talk about data transfer? It seems like hidden cost. Do they charge data transfer fees, for example, from S3 to EMR?
So Amazon doesn't charge you for transfer of data from any AWS service to another AWS service within the same region.
Correct.
Right. So keeping that in mind, that's what you're going to want to look for. So if I'm moving stuff around, right, if I have to go from service to service, I want to make sure it's in the same region as much as possible. If it can't be in the same region, that's when I'm going to look for S3 to move the data between buckets in different regions and then transfer it to the service, right? Because that's going to be the cheapest way to do it. So let's say I've got Parquet files, right, that I need to have a couple of different locations, and then this region, as long as it doesn't have to be anything like real time, I'm going to let S3 do that transfer and then pull it from the S3 bucket in the different region. Again, if having it real time and you have to transfer between regions is something that's critical to your business, then that's the price you're going to have to pay. If you're doing a lot of it, data transfer is one of those things that if you spin through a lot of it, that you can get a private pricing agreement on through AWS, and but if not, then you have to learn how to game the system. And again, I'm going to keep beating that drum. That's an architecture. That's something you can solve in architecture. But also you have to say like, hey, all right, it's not critical to have this data right now. So all right, we're going to pull it across here, or it doesn't have to be, or it can stay in this region. And we can suck up a little bit in latency for the great reduction in cost of having to set things through different regions. So it comes down to, in that aspect, it comes down to business decision. But there are ways you can kind of work around it. And it's all going to depend on how your application and how your infrastructure is set up.
Yeah, and I wouldn't call data transfer so much a hidden cost per se, but I would say it's not hidden from AWS, right? They're out there showing you exactly what they're going to charge, but it's sort of a fraught issue, right? Because it's easy to stumble into a big data transfer bill, right? Oh, yeah. If you're not really thinking about it carefully. And we've seen this with customers before who come to us and they're struggling with this. And it's really all about making, you just have to be highly conscious about, which regions you deploy things in. And one of the common areas where I see this is someone is attempting to do some sort of hybrid or multi-cloud kind of architecture. And, they're not being thoughtful about the fact that there's data transfer cost associated with moving things from their data centers up into the cloud and back, and linking together services that are spanning multiple regions or multiple providers. So it's just, it's less about them being hidden. It's more about it being a very complex kind of challenge, right?
And it's one that slips under the radar in a lot of considerations. Like if you own a high performance sports car like a BMW, sure, you can afford the monthly payments and that's well and good. Maybe you can afford like some of the routine maintenance, but if you have to replace a mirror on that thing, you're done. You can't put regular 5W30 oil in that. It's not going to work. So you have to factor all those things in as a cost of your high performance experience, whether it's for a car or for your application.
Yeah, I think data transfer slips off the radar too. For if you just look at your bill visually, it's usually EC2, RDS, S3, and then some other services, and then you see data transfer. But proportionally, when you look at data transfer or some change over time, then you see it's up 20, 30, 40%. that's where the conversation starts to be had.
I would say too, data transfer is particularly difficult sometimes because you can tag a lot of resource costs with AWS, but you can't really tag data transfer. Mm-hmm. You can know region to region, maybe you can drill down service to service, but if you're trying to associate it with a specific cost to a specific application, it can be kind of difficult sometimes. So that does take, that is going to take some tooling. That's one of the things I think that Cloudhealth can definitely help you with, is kind of trace those things back and figure out when it started, how it started, where it's coming from, and going from where to where. But it is a complicated issue. But like John said, it's not hidden. It's just something that has a lot of aspects to it that people don't often consider.
Yep. I think that's it's a common answer to many of these things, unfortunately, is, it's not that it's hidden, it's that it's complicated.
Yeah. And I think honestly, that's why, to self-promote a little bit. I mean, that's why people use people like us. That's why, because we have the experience to be able to see those trends, to figure out kind of things that may be hidden from plain view, mostly because we've all paid too much for an AWS bill at one time or another and got tired of it.
I think it's also really important. It's a good point, Tim, is that, I was once a technical resource.
Just about like.
Oh, go ahead, Jonathan.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, all right. I was going to say, I was once a technical resource too, and I've certainly moved away from that part of my career and I'm more focused on cost management. But I find it really interesting when, I can jump into a role and start talking to a customer and see these patterns from a high level, just simply because I'm a third party looking in, right? People tend to get very ingrained in their own environment, and you start looking at the same thing over and over again, and it's like, oh, that's just a benign error. That's a benign problem. It's a benign problem. There's no real issue there. Well, there might be, and let's try to figure out what it is. And just having that third party take a look at things and understand what's going on and ask questions can really help. Even I may not be the most technical resource in the world, and I may not be the best person to, investigate the problem with you. But if we can help you identify where the problem is and what's costing you money, and we've done this with customers plenty of times where people come in and it's like, hey, well, did you think about this thing? And I know, going back to the thing Tim was just talking about earlier in the call with, a customer was spending, what was it, $30,000 a month in
$30,000 a month for a missing sleep function.
Yeah. We were able to look at that and see it and spot it and say, well, this is roughly when it started. And because they were trying to figure it out in their head. They weren't thinking straight about the issue. We can go back and look at the graphs. All right, this trended up starting around this time. We can see very specifically when this happened and when this happened, and as things go along. And they're like, wow, that was actually really helpful just to have a third-party person looking in and understanding what's going on in our account.
Yeah, well said, Jason. And one thing I'll just point out is we didn't really talk much about how it works to engage with Mission, but just to drop that information in, you can definitely reach out to us. There's a little link at the bottom here about how to lower your AWS bill. We've got a whole bunch of options, one of which is called IDP, Instant Discount Program. Effectively, it doesn't cost you anything. There's no long-term contract. You basically just sign up and we cut your bill by up to 5% right away. Right. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because, like Jason was saying, it isn't just, getting some better tools, right? Getting Cloudhealth is a huge and important, step you can take towards your cost optimization journey, but you still need to deploy it. You need to action it. You need to have that perspective about how to use the data, right? And at the end of the day, that extra perspective is super valuable. So that's something we give our customers Cloudhealth, at no cost as part of that program. So then you get the expertise of folks like Jason, right? Backing up the great tool to interpret it and decide what to do. All right. So I'm going to go to the next question here, and keep them coming, by the way, audience. I love the engagement and seeing people voting things up. And this next one is voted up, and I don't have any good answers for it because I don't have a lot of experience with GovCloud. But the question was, are there particular strategies for minimizing costs with AWS Gov? And Stan here says specifically for EKS, but in general also. Does anyone have commentary on that?
So AWS Gov, you got to remember, is just another region. as far as AWS is concerned, but it's a premium region because of all the things that they have to do in order to make these all the various requirements come to pass. EKS in general has some cost optimization strategies, but it's going to depend on your workload. I think if you are using EKS for stateful workloads, then you're going to then your cost optimization isn't going to be within EKS itself. It's going to be on the things where you are relying upon for state. It's one of the things I suggest, again, leverage a spot fleet if you can, leverage Fargate if you can, let your scale up and scale down be automatic, unless you have a good strategy and a good automation for doing that scale up and scale down on your own, then that's great. With EKS, you are going to be charged just once the cluster is created, you're going to be charged for the control plane right off the hour. So the problem with that is it's not like you can just go and destroy the control plane and recreate it again. So you're always going to have that bias cost. So what you maybe want to do is minimize the number of clusters you have. And I think what happens, a lot of folks just create a cluster for everything, right? This is a cluster, that's a cluster, that's a cluster. Instead of creating namespaces within the cluster, every time you create a cluster, you're going to increase the overall just standard bias charge just for it existing. So try and leverage as few clusters as you can. And then again, it's going to get on top of, if you're not running Fargate, what type of instances are you running them on? Are these instances reserved? Are they on savings plans? What does your storage look like? So there's a lot of factors into it. I will say if you are running EKS and you're running it on your own instances, then your cost optimization strategy is going to be just like EC2 instance cost optimization strategy. If you're running it on Fargate, it's going to look a little bit different. If you are running stateless workloads, or utilizing other managed services, then you have some more leverage you can pull as to where you're keeping state at, what kind of instances you're running, whether they're running on demand, which in general I don't think people should do if they can avoid it, or whether it's going to be on spot or any kind of reserved instances you have.
That was a significantly more complete answer than I could have given when it comes to GovCloud, especially. Thanks, Tim, for that. So some more questions. This one is actually near and dear to my heart, so I'm going to go ahead and start answering it. So what suggestions do you have for evangelizing cost-saving best practices in a dev environment where devs are quickly and iteratively creating resources? So I am going to give you my view on this as a person who I am a dev, right? I am an engineer. That's what I like to do. I like to build stuff. And the challenge here is you really got to the heart of the issue with cost and cloud, right? AWS pioneered making infrastructure available on demand via API. And that is extremely powerful. Everything is utility-based. Use it. You pay for what you use, and it's super easy. You don't have to file a ticket asking for someone to go rack and stack a server. You don't have to ask for, your IT department to buy more drives to add more storage capacity, right? You just do it. Now, the good news is that this is all available and exciting, and you have all this freedom. The bad news is if without some controls in place, like Jason's saying, your devs are going to run up your bill real quick, right? And they're not going to necessarily be paying close attention. And I really do like how the person who asked this question, which I don't, Jesus, it looks like, what suggestions do you have for evangelizing it? And I think that is really the right view, right? You need to make sure that your engineers pivot their mindset a little bit about this infrastructure. So yes, here's this freedom. Here's the world in which you live. But there are some guardrails that you can put in place, and you can help them embrace them to ensure that they stay in the right track. And the last thing I'll say is one of my favorite tools for this is to help a developer understand how cloud empowers them to be a part of the cost conversation. In the past, they were not a part of that conversation as much. They were asked to stay within certain boundaries. And my favorite example of this is serverless. Serverless is unique in this regard because if you're building an application with a serverless architecture, you look at your bill, your cost reports, and you do your analysis, you can identify particular functions that are hot. the code itself is costing you money. And in the past, if you're an engineer and you've asked for time or resources to do a refactor, for example, or an optimization, it was always difficult to come up with an ROI. Well, with something like AWS, there's a lot more cost transparency about what you're using, especially with something like serverless. Now you can go in and say, if I can make this function 30% more efficient, I can save exactly this much money on our bill, finance department, and they will love you for that. And so you're now a part of the conversation, right? So evangelize by being a part of the conversation. That's an exciting thing for an engineering team. Anything else to add from the rest of the panel?
So I think when you're talking about the first suggestion I would have for evangelizing cost saving practices is going to be tagging, which may seem a little maybe not direct, but you can't evangelize cost savings when people can't see how much they're spending.
Yep.
So if you have tagging in there and your resources are tagged, especially when it's spent up by dev, you can say, all right, this dev group cost us $50,000 this month. And that's all well and good if that $50,000 is necessary. But if not, let's see if we can get that cost lower. And it doesn't have to be, the first thing is visibility, right? You can't change behaviors based on a metric if you don't know what that metric is. So first you tag, right? And then you look at setting up your guardrails, try and figure out what a reasonable number is, or just trying to make sure that if it's considered reasonable, then make sure to try not to go outside of that if you can. I think tagging is first and tooling is second. Like using a control tower, the account vending facilities within AWS Control Tower, so that if a developer needs to spin up an account, they can spin up an account that's assigned to them with all the proper tags and all the proper cost center allocations and cost guardrails as well, and let them do what they need, right? And without stomping on anything else that they need. But the thing I like about the account vending machine is that if they need to spin up something temporarily, they run the account, they do their stuff, and then they can go away. And then the next time they need one, they can pop up another one. But the fact that all the things are tagged, that all the costs are allocated to a certain developer, to a certain project, to a certain group or whatever, you can track that well. And then with that visibility, then you can start trying to evangelize behavioral changes in how you do things. So it starts with visibility, and it starts with really, so it goes culture, which if you're talking about evangelizing cost savings, then I think your culture is going in the right direction. Then you have to have the visibility, which you're going to need in tagging, and you're going to, again, pull out in cost reports with Cloudhealth. You can use Cost Explorer, whatever, but you still need to be able to have that visibility, and then develop the tooling around that so that developers can still do what they need to do and still have those guardrails in place.
It's funny, people ask me all the time, how should I tag my environment? How should I report on this? Well, how does your finance team want you to report on it? How does your CIO want you to report on it?
What are the story you're trying to tell?
Exactly. Well, that's the biggest thing. You start, the question was around, how should we deal with dev environments and deal with cost management there? I think every business that we work with and that I've ever worked with, the question starts from up above. Well, what's important to your business? What do you want to be able to report on? I could tell you to go and tag stuff with an environment tag and an owner tag and, a customer or project tag, whatever. But if nobody in the business cares about it, then you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
So it's really important to understand what the business goals are too.
I think too, it helps to help paint the picture, it helps see the larger picture, I should say. If you're spending $50,000 a month in dev infrastructure, right, and you can cut that down by $20,000 a month, that's 1 to 2 people's salary a month, right? Yeah. And so if your dev shop needs to have more people and you're overworked, maybe having the visibility and the tooling to cut those costs, and then maybe they can do that. And I've seen those initiatives work where they can say, all right, well, we have cut our costs for our infrastructure, and we are running very efficiently as much as we can. And now we can expand the team because the business has the money for it. I think in 2020, that's especially important, right? So, again, if you are talking about evangelizing cost savings, then the culture is headed, I think, in the right direction as long as people are aware. I'm sure your CFO, I'm sure is going to be behind that. I'm sure your CIO is going to be behind that. Usually your CTO is going to be behind that. It's just a matter of pushing that change down. So everyone is part of it and everyone understands how important it is. And I think that especially if you don't have a lot of processes and it's the wild, wild west development, it's a little bit hard. Engineers have opinions and they get accustomed to things. And when you change it, there's always a little bit of contention. But I think as you work to show the importance of why it's important to be cost efficient, then most people are going to get the buy-in.
Yeah, and I think backing up to add to that to Tim's point on just the visibility, it starts with visibility. So what are people spending? Because you can say it's not a cost optimizer. You're not spending the correct money, but if you have some of those data points to work with of, hey, this is infrastructure that's wasted, or it's over provisioned, or if there's a budget that Dev works with, like I said, $50,000. Is it $50,000 a month? If it is, track to that. And then if there's internal KPIs that the business cares about, utilize that. So when you have that data and say, hey, it's been $10,000 a month of waste for the past 3 months, that's some headcount you can look at, or new tooling that you need, or some ProServe that you need to onboard some new services internally. There's a lot of things that I think people tend to forget about until the data is presented. But I think it starts with like I said, visibility, tracking some KPIs, and then propagating that down to information that they care about. Because when they get some more money behind them and tracking to their budget, I think it's resonates pretty well.
Yeah, I totally agree there. If we can make a developer look like a financial hero somewhere upstream, that's awesome. It's like, hey, we've given you all these tools. You can go figure out. If you want to go up to your CFO and just say, I just saved the company $20,000 a month, guarantee you're going to get a pat on the back for that.
100%. It cannot be oversold how important it is. You are empowered to be a part of the conversation, right? It is such a shift in paradigm from the past. Take full advantage, right? So that evangelism will pay off. Okay, quick time check. We have about 8 minutes left. Keep the questions coming. As I mentioned in the chat, we have one more in our list here from Cal. And thank you, Cal. You've given us a couple of great questions. So this one is about a particular use case. So if I have a containerized web application that could see a lot of traffic, what's the most cost-effective service to run it on? ECS and EC2, Fargate, or EKS? And I'm sure there are other answers that people on the panel would be willing to say. I'm gonna give you a 2-word, very frustrating answer, and then let everyone unpack, because I guarantee they're gonna say the same thing. It depends.
I would say on the face of the question, right?
Yeah.
What is the most cost-effective service to run it? ECS, EKS, and Fargate are all the same thing at this point, but the answer is spot instances.
Nice.
So it doesn't matter which one you want to choose, whether it's EKS or whether it's ECS or whether you just want to Docker Swarm on your own, but it's going to be spot instances. And you can also leverage like spot inst itself. But yeah, that's going to be your most cost effective. But to Jonathan's point, it depends, because if you're just running code and it's stateless and it doesn't matter, use spot. If it's stateful, spot may be a problem. But spot is going to be the most cost effective. And we have customers that utilize spot instances just masterfully, just absolutely masterfully to run containerized workloads that are very spiky and peaky and unpredictable in their demand, and just save just a tremendous amount of money in doing so. So if you're, again, it goes back to architecture, right? If your application or your web server application is architected enough that it can be resilient to unpredictable termination, then absolutely leverage spot instances for it, and you will save a ton of money.
Yeah, good point. And also, too, just to add, and who does this, the web traffic or app, who does it serve? Is it internal? Is it, externally facing? That's one thing to, propagate. A lot of people aren't really just deploying microservices just to start something new. But it's concerning, serving an external workload, and you just want to get away from managing the underlying, then, you can move over to, Fargate, or just kind of, get away from, EC2. But, as Tim mentioned, it's the infrastructure decision that we all have to face at the end of the day is, how much time you're going to be putting into it, who's it going to serve, does spot make sense for this underlying team or web app? and kind of move from there. So it's
Yeah.
it's Jonathan, and it depends.
And I would say to add to that as well, like just think above and beyond the actual raw cost of some of these decisions on like ECS versus EKS, right? Think about it also from an operational perspective, right? And if you include EC2 in here and auto scaling, and there are lots of different ways to attack a problem like this, right? Many different solutions going to be like for you. So adopting the managed services is a really good idea, right? In using something like Fargate, it reduces your overall kind of management burden, right? There's less for you to do. Less for you to do means more time to do other things, means better cost overall, right? So you have to kind of look at the big picture ROI. And the other thing I'll say is complexity is tempting for engineers, right? To a certain degree, we like a lot of power and flexibility. But for example, Kubernetes right now, I hear people talking about deploying things in Kubernetes or deploying workloads on EKS. And I ask them about the workload and I'm like, this is so simple. Why are you using this big hammer, right, for this use case? So I would say be thoughtful about that as well, right? Look at the big picture. Do I need this complexity? Is it worth it? What's the overhead? And by all means, if you're going to use Kubernetes, please do consider using EKS because running Kubernetes is not an easy task.
I think the thing that people need to understand, especially larger organizations that are looking to transition off of instantiated workloads, is that Kubernetes is not serverless. You are still running on instances, whether you want to manage them yourself or whether you're going to have Fargate manage them. So you're not getting out of the running instances business. It's just, you're running VMs and they look different now, right? Essentially. Yeah. So if you want to leverage serverless, especially for small things, and if there's small things that don't need a reliable, like a predictable, always on startup time, then you're going to want to use something like Lambda, or you're going to want to use API Gateway, or you're going to want to use step functions. There's a lot of other options you can choose there. But on the converse, there's a lot of people out there that are doing some tremendously really cool things with Lambda. And they are trying to make Lambda behave like it's a container and it's always onness and always ready to answer. And that's not what Lambda does. So ideally, you're going to want to have, again, this is what I'm going to talk about. We can talk about architecture, where you're ideally going to architecture application that the things that can just be run, just simple functions. They don't have to have a guaranteed always, single millisecond startup or response time to be functions, and then things that are essential or stateful or need to have any other kind of special considerations that don't make it or too big, I should say, or too big to run in a function. Those are going to be things you're going to want to look at a container for. So your architecture should span across a few different types of compute. And the exception, like in this day and age, should be running it just on an instance, not that should not be the rule.
Exactly. All right, just looking at our time, we have about a minute left. So with that, I'm gonna ask each a parting shot. If there's a particular thing you want to say, like if I had to summarize the most important thing about AWS cost optimization, I'll give you each a quick minute to give your review. And Jason, I'll let you go first. Put you on the spot.
I'll take way less than a minute. Tag everything.
Tag everything. I love it. Good answer. Do you have the one thing you want everyone to know about AWS cost optimization?
Cost optimization starts on the whiteboard.
There you go, Tim. Nice. Yeah, I think I'm going to reiterate the "it's complicated" kind of message. Right? Understand that, and by all means, please do reach out to a partner like Mission if you need help. Like this is, you do not have to go this alone. Our IDP program is a great way to get started. If you click on that button at the bottom that says "Click to lower your AWS bill today," it doesn't cost you anything. In fact, it probably will save you up to 5% out of the gate, and you'll get Cloudhealth for free. It's kind of a no-brainer. And then from there, we can dive in with you. We can tag everything with Jason and start driving that bill down and get you more optimized. So with that, go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say, and you get access to Tim.
And you get access to Tim too.
Tim. So we've covered.
I am a premium service.
If you are a Mission customer, you can yell at me as well. I won't be very useful to you, but you can yell at me. Right? That's what I'm here for. But thank you to, first of all, everyone in attendance. We really appreciate your engagement and your questions. What a great event. I'm really happy we did this. We'll do another one soon. And thank you to Jason and Tim and John for joining me. And thank you to T-Mobile for, again, sponsoring this live stream. Not really, but appreciate it, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.